I've got Steve Clavey from the Land Down Under today. Steve learned his medicine in China and Taiwan in the late 70s through the mid 80s. And in addition to being one of the co-authors of the third edition of the Materia Medica from Eastland Press, he's also the author of Fluid Physiology and Pathology in Chinese Medicine, and he's one of the editors behind The Lantern. Hey, if you're interested in the latest research, if you use Chinese medicine in an integrative practice, or you're interested in the biochemical basis for acupuncture works, The Lantern probably isn't for you. But if you cotton to the perspective that the human is an integral part, really a reflection, of the social, meteorological, and cosmic matrix, along with the various methods and perspectives that have helped to inform Chinese medicine practitioners through the centuries, well, The Lantern just might be your cup of tea. Look for a link over on the show notes page. It's an amazing journal if you don't know about it, and we got Steve to thank for that. You know, Steve doesn't just spend his time with writing and scholarly pursuits. He actually has an active practice in Melbourne, Australia, and he specializes in the treatment of women's health, and he has a focus on fertility and endometriosis. That is the main topic of our discussion today. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. All the sponsors here provide helpful products or services that you'll find beneficial in your clinical work. Want to get better at treating concussions and other neurological conditions? Clayton Shu has some innovative methods. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. Later in the show, Jane offers you helpful suggestions on how to raise your rates, and Golden Flower Chinese Herbs shares a journey of healing that I think you'll recognize. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Geological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more. Ever found yourself listening to a geological conversation and thinking, wow, I needed to hear that? Yeah, me too. And I never know when I'm going to hear a guest say something that stops my world and reboots it with a larger perspective. If these conversations have ever helped you to feel more grounded, more inspired, or just less alone in this strange and wonderful work we do, consider becoming a member or supporting the podcast with a bit of tithing to the donation jar. It helps keep the lights on here at the Geological Sound and Motion Lab so that we can bring you these conversations every Tuesday morning. You'll find all the details at geological.com. Thanks for listening and for being a part of this.
Hey there, I'm Cameron Jafari, an acupuncturist from Los Angeles. So I started learning nanopuncture from Dr. Clayton Shu because I was facing these complex neurological conditions like stroke and MS in my clinic, and I just felt like I lacked a solid process to treat them. Brain-related issues always felt like a whole different animal, and I was looking for a clinical system that worked and could guide me through them. So after attending my first nanopuncture seminar, I was able to apply the process pretty quickly and with pretty amazing results. I remember the first stroke patient I saw afterwards was a guy who had had a stroke 2 years back, and he couldn't talk at all. And after a few treatments, he started saying a few words. And a few treatments after that, he could actually have conversations. It was pretty incredible. So this is why I feel like nanopuncture is the future of acupuncture neurology. And you can be a part of that. Their next seminar is on treating concussions and is being co-taught by both Dr. Shu and Dr. Ayla Wolf in New York City on April 26th and 27th. To learn more, visit nanopunctureseminars.com.
Hey, Steve, 欢迎到 Qiological.
Michael, nice to talk to you today.
Always a pleasure. So, I first met you when I was a student all those years ago, and you wandered on up to Seattle, and you were the first person to really teach us the gynecological stuff. You've been into this for a long, long time. I recently was reading in the Lantern, in fact, that you studied with really a lineage holder of Chinese medicine, the fellow in the Song family. They've got what, 37 generations of doctors or something like that?
Well, I have to say I was surprised because when I was doing the studying, it was very soon after the Cultural Revolution, and they didn't know which way the political situation was going to go. And nobody mentioned this because people had been beaten to death for much lesser offenses than belonging to a long tradition of Chinese medicine. So somebody just happened to whisper to me saying, this guy you've been studying with for a year, his family history in this goes back a long way. And so we had a little graduation ceremony, and I was sitting next to him, and I said, your family's been famous in gynecology for 300 years, and that's longer than the history of my own country. It's almost unbelievable. And he said, no, you've made a mistake. I said, oh, what do you mean? And he said, we've been famous in Ningbo City for 300 years, but before that, we go back another 900. And I'm going, oh, I didn't know anything. There was nothing to search on that. But then recently, I started noticing these articles coming up in Chinese talking about this extended lineage, and it was pretty amazing. It's now safe to talk about that, so it started to come out. Of course, for my part, I only realized that belonging to a long lineage is also a valuable commodity, but I never worried about that. And in fact, I was only with him for a year, so I can't really say that I'm part of his lineage. Although I met his son recently. They came out to Australia, and they had me record something in Chinese for their father, who's now passed away. That was my teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So they when they do their advertising, I do appear in the pictures sometimes, which is a bit funny.
Got that big nose in there to spice it up, huh?
Yeah, but this way back that nobody would recognize me anymore.
Yeah. So, I mean, was it just pure luck that you happened to be studying with this cat? I mean, how did that come about?
Well, I was basically assigned to him, and he was not at all interested in teaching me. He just ignored me for the first couple of months until I did exactly the right thing, which was on a trip to Hong Kong, I bought him a carton of foreign cigarettes. And when I came back, suddenly I was okay. Because this guy, I have to say, this guy, he would smoke one cigarette per patient.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about 40 patients in the morning. So the air got pretty thick in there. And he also had a Ningbo accent. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard a Ningbo accent, but it's quite difficult to understand. And I was just barely getting my head around the Hangzhou dialect. Because, of course, this wasn't translated. I'm just sitting there trading on my few years of Mandarin from Taiwan. But luckily, the son, the one who came out, when I really had difficulty, he'd translate. And then I would sit there and just copy scripts. So I've got stacks. I still have stacks of these scripts that I would copy from him. And they're still really useful because this lineage, this tradition is part of the Zhejiang gynecology style. And the Zhejiang gynecology style really emphasizes the relationship between liver and spleen.
Okay, wait a minute. Hang on just a second. So it's not just this one family. It's not just this Song family.
The Song family is one of the 5 major Zhejiang styles of gynecology. There's
Oh, wow.
there's the Bamboo Forest Monastery, which has been hugely influential, and I use their formulas all the time. There's the Chen and the Chen family. They've sort of, those two traditions have sort of died out over the last 100 years. And then there's some others, some of the more recent ones, which still maintain the same emphasis on relationship of liver and spleen, as opposed, for example, to kidneys. But like Qiu Xiaomei, who Sharon Weisenbaum studied with and translates a lot. She's very good. I use some of her stuff too. He Zihuai was alive when I was there, and I have his book, but I haven't researched his stuff very much. But they all share the same very simple, practical approach to things. The use of food herbs or herbs, like, for example, Qiu Xiaomei. Qiu Xiaomei was the one who really instituted the now pretty much widespread use of Maya for reducing lumps and cysts. I was in a lecture by her.
Maya.
Yeah, Maya for cysts, like breast lumps or ovarian cysts or things like that.
That's interesting, because I would usually think of the, like the Muli and those, or
Yes, that's
or
right.
like the Kongbu, or
Yep.
the phlegm dispersing things.
Mm-hmm.
Maya.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. This is very, very gentle sort of thing. I mean, her reasoning. I listened to a lecture by her, which is there's a funny story involved with that. But I was in a lecture and she was explaining how she came to this idea. Her thought process was, well, you can use Maya to help women wean. This is big doses, of course, right? Like 30 grams for the cyst. But for helping weaning, you need 60 grams, 120 grams, and they just drink it as tea all day long. And this helps reduce the breast milk. And she thought, well, if it can do that and the breasts get less full and distended, what about breast lumps? So she tried it, and it worked for breast lumps. And she thought, okay, well, if it works for breast lumps, what about other types of lumps? And she tried it, and it was good. It's very gentle. It's easy. It's bland. Doesn't taste bad. It's cheap. I mean, what more do you want? So this emphasis on food herbs like hawthorn, shanja or chenpi or qingpi, the mandarin peels and things like that is really a distinctive characteristic of the Zhejiang style.
Any sense of how this came about? I mean, I know that close by there's the the Menghe clan. There's this group of doctors that kind of had their own thing going. Was this one of these situations where you've got this group of practitioners? They all kind of have their own thing, but they kind of intermingle with each other, and they all influence each other.
I don't think there's a direct relation to the Menghe stream like Volker talks about, but there is a relation in the sense that they are part of this north-south divide.
Right. No, actually, I didn't mean to suggest that they were part of Menghe, but I was saying, like the Menghe doctors, there were these group. They kind of hung out with each other. They competed with each other, but they also learned from each other.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough to say. I think the north-south divide is the determining factor in the simple, easy on the digestion type of style that the Zhejiang gynecologists had. I was at the Red Cross Hospital in Hangzhou for a while, and where I studied with Song Guangji was in at the 中医学院, the Zhejiang 中医学院, but we were in the Munjin, in the clinical section there. And one of the doctors that I knew from the Red Cross came over, and I was a bit surprised. She came over to get a consultation with him, and I said, so yeah, I hadn't seen her for a while, so I went out in the hall and I said, why did you come all the way across town to see him when you've got Gao Laosher back at the Red Cross? She's really good. And she said, oh, well, yeah, Gao Laosher is very good, but you know what? Professor Song's formulas just feel so good in the stomach.
Ah,
And I'll tell you why.
so there's that spleen liver thing, right?
Yeah, there's that. That's true. But he would also, all of the herbs would be paojert, right? All of them would be, it'd be jiao baizhu or chao baishao or chao dangwei or chao dangshen. They'd all be prepared in advance. So basically they're cooked, right, already. And he would use particularly small doses, well, particularly compared to other people. So, Dangshan, instead of being like 15 grams, he'd use maybe 10 or even 8 sometimes. Yang Hu Suo would be, 6 to 8, maybe 10 in extreme doses. And things like that. So he would use small doses of prepared herbs and they just feel good on the stomach. And this is where that north-south divide comes in, because the concept there is that the northerners are people of the steppes. They're infused with the Mongol blood and the Manchus, and there's sort of been an intermingling in there, and they're bigger, they're taller, they're stronger. When you're using, say, Shanghan Lun formulas, man, you gotta really hit them in order to sweat. But the Southerners generally, from the Yangtze on down, they're a bit, they're a bit smaller, they're a bit more softer. And I think historically that's probably accurate because, of course, when the northern tribes invaded, the court went south. That's why the Hangzhou dialect sounds so much like Mandarin. So they went south and they were rich. You've got the rich people of Suzhou, you've got the rich people of Hangzhou. I mean, these guys were the salt merchants. They were the big business people. And of course, when you have lots of money and you're not poor, you tend to go, you get a bit soft. You lose your edge a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're prescribing, that has to be kept in mind.
And you like the finer things. Well, isn't there also kind of I think it's like, well, the Northerners, it's like, we're tough. We wouldn't use those, wussy little Southern formulas. What in the hell's that going to do? I mean, is there kind of a cultural piece to that as well? And the same with the Southerners. It's like, we're delicate people. We can't handle the Mahuang.
Yes. I think there's a bit of self-belief there as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the Song family is part of this Zhejiang current, so to speak. These days, women's health and fertility is a big business. It's, a lot of people do it. It can be very lucrative. There's a lot of cozying up to some of the, more integrative medicine side of things, reproductive endocrinology and all that. I'm wondering how this soft Zhejiang Song family style fits in with all of that.
I think it works pretty well. I mean, patients can sometimes worry about herbs, and well, you know how I do it. I set them up before they ever get in. When patients say, "Oh, I've got a friend who would take this," I say, "Look, really emphasize how bad the herbs are." And then when they call up for consultation, for initial consultation, the secretary says, "Now, you've heard about the herbs, right?"
Yep.
Yeah. And then when they get in to see me, I ask them, "How'd you hear about me?" And they go, "Oh, so and so told me." And I say, "Okay, did they tell you about the herbs?" And by then they're freaking out, right?
Yeah.
They're going, "Well, how bad are these things?" I go, "What's the worst thing you've ever had in your whole life?"
Well, there is the chodofu.
Well, gosh, even I can't do that. But you like it, don't you?
Pushing.
Oh, really? But they by then the patients are going, "Oh, this is terrible." I go, "Well, I think you'll be all right. You look tough to me." So then, of course, they take the herbs home, they cook them up. They're expecting this really, 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 really awful thing, and it's not too bad.
Not too bad. Well, and if you're using these more food grade herbs, that's a whole different story, really.
Yeah, there are ways to use stronger herbs if you have to, but a lot of Chinese medicine really is managing patient expectations, and because this is totally new to them, they don't know what's going on. It's not like in China where somebody will come in and they'll say, "Oh, I've got pain down my lung channel," where they know what's going on. They know what the score is. But here we've got to be quite careful into how we introduce people to particularly raw herbs. But if you do it right, patients not only don't have a problem with it. I get people coming to me going, yeah, I've had the granules, I've had all that stuff, and they're convenient, but I'm just not getting the results I want. And my friend said that they're taking raw herbs and they're getting really good results. And it's not that granules don't get results; they do, but sometimes you need the strength and the refinement that you can get with prescribing raw herbs that you really tailor for that patient. And that's where I think, coming back to your original question, that yeah, for women these days, it's a really good way to go. But it's not always really gentle, though, I have to say. For example, if I'm starting off with somebody who's come in for infertility, for example, very often I have to go a little bit stronger. I might start off with a small script until they take it and go, oh, yeah, that was okay.
All right, I can do this.
Yeah, that's right. I can do this. But pretty soon, if not the first time, then at least the second time, I'm going to really start looking at what Western medicine, and I have to say, a lot of other people doing Chinese medicine don't look at very much, and that's the lining to the uterus. I mean, as I say to the patients, the lining of the uterus is the field you're trying to sow a crop in. And so, most of the time, people go to a Chinese herbalist, acupuncturist, and if they're going for fertility, they'll end up with kidney tonifying herbs, right? Or maybe at the best, they might get liver cheese smoothing herbs. But without fixing that lining to the uterus, fixing that endometrium, making sure there's no clotting there, and that like a well-tended field, you've removed the weeds, you've removed the rocks, and you can now plant something. So often that step is totally ignored. And when patients don't let me do that, for example, they say, "Oh no, but I'm right in the middle of an IVF cycle right now, and I need something for egg quality." IVF people, the Western doctors, they are totally OCD, totally focused on eggs. If you ever go, "What's wrong?" If the patient ever asks them what's happening, why isn't it working? They go, "Oh, it's your eggs. You're getting old. It's your eggs." And yeah, that's important. But those eggs have to go somewhere. And it's just like they seem not to pay any attention to once the egg's fertilized, then it's just the luck of the draw whether it works or not. Well, it isn't just the luck of the draw. You can, in a very short order of time, make that lining to the uterus much more receptive simply by asking detailed questions about the period, the color of the period, the consistency of the blood, the timing, the length, the heaviness. All those things are really crucial to know. And I say to patients, if I've got 3 months to get this endometrium in better shape, that's the fastest way to make a big difference with your fertility. And that's particularly if you see any signs of blood stagnation, like Greg Livingston was talking about in your podcast. Those are all so crucial, but asking about the period is really important.
Steve, what are some of the key things that you look for with a woman's period that you want to see change so that they've got that fertile field? What are the key things that make you go, yeah, we got to work on this, this, and this?
Okay, two main differentiations. Is it too thick or is it too thin? Too thick means clots, right? Too thin means that topsoil isn't thick enough to hold a fertilized ovum coming in. So I will ask them how heavy it is, and generally speaking, my range of normal is they should have to change, not do they change, but they should have to change, say, tampons or pads, just normal pads, 3 times a day, but they should never have to change more than every 2 hours. Nowadays, a lot of women are using cups, and I reckon that a cup is about 2 normal pads. So maybe at least having to change a cup and a half, these menstrual cups that women are using now. Maybe they're not doing that in the States yet.
On the West Coast, they were. I live in the Midwest.
Okay. Well, then in a little while, they'll also be coming in with the menstrual underwear. This is brand new.
Okay. So one of the questions to ask is not just, is the flow heavy or light, but get very specific. How many pads?
Oh, yeah. Very, very specific. Because, people will come in and go, "Oh, I've got such a heavy period." "Oh, yeah? How often do you change?" "Oh, man, I have to change it twice a day." You know what it's like. In Chinese medicine, all the questions you really got to chase it down. Somebody can come in And I had this not that long ago. Oh, my thrush is playing up. Now, if you heard that, what would you think?
I'm sorry, say that again.
What does thrush mean for you? So, oh, my nose bleeds. So, you can't make us. This is so crucial when you're doing Chinese herbal medicine anyway. You can't assume that you know what the patient's talking about. Track it down. For example, with endometriosis, I'll do the same thing. What does endometriosis mean for you? When do you go, oh, that's my endo making me feel that? What's that feeling that you get when the endo comes up? But I guess we can talk about endometriosis a little bit later. With the fertility aspect, the length of the period is really crucial. If a woman who's in her 30s comes in and says, oh, yeah, my period lasts for 7 days, it really should be 4 or 5 days. And 7 days indicates to me that they probably have some clotting that needs to come out. The consistency of the blood, again, is really crucial. Is it too thick or too thin? Is the color bright, or is it brown, or is it pink? Another question that's really important to ask that nobody ever asks, is there any clear mucus in the menstrual blood? Because if they have, and what I mean by that is not a mucousy blood or not sort of a sticky blood, I mean actual clear mucus. So some women can say, oh, half of the tampon is white or sticky with this clear mucus, the other half is red. So that's what I'm talking about, is really detailed stuff. Now, clear mucus like that could show that there's fluid retention in the fallopian tubes, that's called hydrosalpinx, or it could simply show that there's phlegm in the tubes, which can give you little spider web adhesions, just enough to slow that egg down in its passage through the fallopian tube, just enough to slow it down so that by the time it gets fertilized and implants, the timing is off. So it's little things like that we can tell a lot. I don't really trust well, it's not that I don't trust it, but the scan that they do that shows the thickness of the endometrium, I think is more like a farmer standing about half a mile away saying, I reckon the soil in that field is good enough. You have to really get those detailed questions, which I think are much better with Chinese medicine. Not that I'm biased or anything.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that I use to keep my practice running smoothly. So, let's talk about something that can be a little bit uncomfortable, raising your fees. I know, this is something that might feel awkward, but it doesn't have to. With a bit of planning and care, you can handle it in a way that feels right for you and your patients. One tip, give yourself at least 2 months to prepare. This gives you time to get comfortable with the change and let your patients know what's happening. You can share the news through emails, booking reminders, or even just a friendly little sign in your clinic, and avoid over-apologizing. Instead, keep it straightforward and matter of fact. Keeping things consistent across the ways that you communicate can really help avoid confusion. Fee increases aren't always easy, but you're not on your own here. For more tips and ideas on how to communicate these changes with confidence, check out frontdesk.chain.app and look for the article, How to Tell Your Clients You're Raising Your Fees. Oh, and one last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, use the code GYNECOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Well, you just have more experience with it.
True.
This for me is one of the real beauties of Chinese medicine, especially we can dial in getting the information that we need. It really can give us a picture that we can work with.
Well, I think again, I'm a bit of a traditionalist because I really don't mix anything else. I don't do naturopathy, homeopathy, or anything else. I just do Chinese medicine. And back all those decades ago when I started, that was really rare. But I just thought, look, nobody seems to be doing just plain old Chinese medicine. I'm going to try it and see if it.
Let's see if it works. Yeah.
And it has been. And in fact, doubling down on that, I really just it's important to understand things from a Chinese medicine point of view, or you can have your own insights into mechanisms, and this is how Chinese medicine progresses over the centuries. Is people have insights into what's going on. This next issue of the Lantern, we've got a record of a day in the clinic of Auntie Babbage, who I know is one of the people you like to read about. But he has some insights into some mechanisms which are peculiarly Auntie Babbage.
Yes, he has a particular frame of reference. Yes, I'm
He
looking
does.
forward to
That's
that.
right.
So you have a unique way of being able to talk to people and really get information. Now, so often with Chinese medicine, I mean, I don't know if they did this to you when you were there, but when I was in both China and Taiwan, if they found out I was a Chinese doctor, the first thing they do is they stick their wrist out, like check my pulse and tell me what's going on. Did they do that stuff to you when you were there?
I do remember being at a restaurant once, and they found out I was a Chinese doctor, and they pointed at this woman who had dark circles under her eyes and said, "Tell me what's wrong with her." And they were having a bit of a joke at her expense because, of course, dark circles under the eyes are called Bai Dai Chen.
Mm-hmm.
Bai Dai Chen is leukorrhea circles.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. But but yeah, it's not only us though. You don't have to be a Westerner to get that. The Chinese doctors throughout the ages have complained about this tendency of patients to try to test you by getting you to take their pulse.
Right. Well, this is the point. And as Western practitioners doing this, I know in my own learning of this, there's this kind of archetype of the great scholarly doctor who can look at the tongue and sort of look at the person and you feel the pulse and you know everything about them. And we sort of have that archetype as well. I think that's knocking around in the background there. Maybe it's because I'm not a very good pulse diagnostician. I tend to ask my patients lots of questions because otherwise it's hard for me to get the information. But isn't there this kind of thing that we have about, well, a good Chinese doctor isn't supposed to ask too many questions?
Well, no, you've got this Zhejiang, right? It's, I think right from the beginning, interrogation is a major part of diagnosis. Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I wouldn't call myself a super pulse taker. Of course, I do reference the pulse, and you can get lots of information from that. Tongue is crucially important.
I'm curious to know how you have developed your skills and ability to ask these kinds of questions. Because I've watched you in clinic and you ask questions unlike most practitioners ask questions. I mean, you really have a way of kind of dialing into areas that people just are not inhabiting.
I think it comes down to not being confused by having to do bunches of other systems. I'm not a naturopath. I'm not a homeopath. I only do Chinese medicine. So in my mind, when I'm dealing with a patient, it's only what's the Chinese medicine pattern here? What's going on? Or if there isn't a pattern, especially what the hell is going on? Because when I came out in the mid 80s and had to start practicing, I wouldn't say I was fantastically well trained. It was, like I said, it was soon after the Cultural Revolution. Things were difficult. Foreigners weren't particularly welcome.
Unless they bring cigarettes.
Yeah, unless you bring the cigarettes. I remember sitting at the Zhejiang TCM College mess hall. They didn't want me fraternizing with the students too much because, of course, they were worried about being attacked themselves, and they're worried that the students would get funny ideas because who knows what this guy's going to say. So they stuck me in sort of the back and gave me some food, but I had to sit there and I had to beat my feet on the floor to keep the rats away because they were just looking at me. Of course, that was then, and things are really, really different now. But they just didn't have any clue what to do with me at that point. So when I got out, a lot of the things I had to think for myself. So, for example, I had a patient once, and I think I told you this story years ago because it did form my thinking. She said, when I smell petrol or gasoline or perfumes, I get really dizzy. I get headaches. What's that about? I didn't have a clue, right? I had to think it out. I had to think that out for myself. And that was a really valuable exercise because, you can look in the classics, you're not going to find what happens when somebody smells petrol or perfume and they get really dizzy. And I mean, in her case, it was a little bit easier because she was really fat. So it did take some thinking at that stage. I've honed my ability since, but gradually I figured out, look, okay, petrol, perfume, gasoline, these are all very pungent smells, right?
Yes.
And they break phlegm up. They break up phlegm, which can allow that phlegm to be carried around the body, and that's what was happening to her. Since then, though, I've realized there can be another aspect to this: petrol, gasoline, perfumes, intense smells like that, because they are pungent and dispersing. You could have the opposite of that. You could have a yin deficient type of patient who has a tendency to yang rising, and they will have a similar effect.
It'll just take the yang qi right up, won't it?
Yeah, that's right. But the treatments are totally different. This is where the pattern aspect comes in. So learning to suss things out for yourself, learning to think, learning to be a TCM detective or Chinese medicine detective is not only crucially important, but it's also a lot of fun.
So it seems, I mean, I remember when I was in school, even though that was a long time ago, I can still remember, and our teachers would often talk about, well, there's these patterns and there's these boxes that you see in the books, but don't put your patients in a box. And there was always this suggestion that we learn to think it out for ourselves, and even if there is something that's explained, in a very simple way by the books, to be able to grasp those fundamentals and use them where you don't understand how things are working yet. And I think for me, this is one of the biggest challenges about being a Chinese medicine practitioner. The stuff that we know and we can kind of work and the things that we're familiar with, that's one thing. But when things kind of go askew and we're not sure where we stand and the things that have worked aren't working, well, of course, this is a wonderful opportunity to learn something new. How do you keep your wits about you when that's going on? And how do you maybe break your frame a bit so you can come up with a decent question that might help you to illuminate what's happening?
Well, I think you were lucky because you had a really good school that emphasized the importance of thinking for yourself. I think that was really crucial. But to directly answer that last question, what I'll tend to do is stop. Say somebody comes in, I've given them a script. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the way to go. They come back in, they go, yeah, I've had things from you in the past that really were fantastic, but this time it didn't quite do it. Or even worse, they might be a first-time patient and they come back and they go, no, didn't do anything. I mean, some patients are just like
Mm-hmm.
that, and they don't notice, which is why it's really crucial in your very first intake to number things. They'll come. I'll say, okay, so what would you like me to work on? They go, oh, I've got so much stuff. Oh, okay, fine. Okay, imagine that you could only fix one of all that stuff, one thing, and you have to live with the rest of it all the rest of your life. What would that number one thing be?
Oh, wow. Really focus them down, huh?
That's right. Oh, no, I couldn't do that. No, no, you have to pick just one. I'm not going to treat just that one thing, but I need to know what's the most important thing for you. Okay, and then I'll write down. So they'll tell me, and then I'll write down one. Okay. Okay, what's the next most important thing? What's the most serious thing for you? Number two, right? Okay, so then they come back. So some patients, you have to do this. They'll come back and they go, yeah, I don't feel any different. I took your herbs. I don't feel any. Okay, so what about this number one thing? Oh, no, that's gone. No, but I still have this thing that's like number 3 or 4 on the list.
I've seen this again and again, of course. We all have.
Indeed, that's right. So that's why it's really crucial to focus on what they feel like. And some patients come in, they've got this Western disease name you've never heard of, and some patients delight in finding these things that they know you'll never have heard of.
Well, and some people just identify with their diagnosis.
Indeed, that's right. And labels do make people feel better, but that doesn't help you because you might not know anything about that thing. It's a bit, when you specialize in gynae, those things get less, and specialize in anything, those bits get less and less. So you have a pretty good handle on all the stuff that's going to walk through the door, even though there's enough to keep everything interesting. But if you're a generalist, you really have to be very broad. And I think the way forward is just use your Chinese medicine. Like I said with the endo, say they come in and they, mention this disease name and say, okay, well, okay, that's fine. So, what does that mean? What does it feel like? Where is it uncomfortable? What are the detailed things? Oh, I feel bad. Okay, where do you feel bad? I just feel awful.
Right.
You really got to press them, and it's. But if they walk out of that room without you totally understanding what they're feeling, it's going to be really hard to get results. You just won't know. So say you've done everything right and they've taken the script. You think you're doing the right thing. They come back and they say, "Yeah, really didn't do anything." Then you've got a dilemma, right? Do you keep going because you haven't done enough, or do you do something different? That's where the clinical judgment comes in, and experience helps with that a lot. I mean, generally, I'll say to people, "Well, you've had this for like 10 years, and I've only been treating you for like 10 days, so maybe it's a bit early to be changing things." On the other hand, it's clear something isn't right. At that point, I'll say to them, "Okay, it looks like I've missed something. I'm going to go right back to basics. I'm going to go right back to, let's start right at the beginning." And I'll just ask them all those things again, looking particularly for places where I might not have understood what they meant. Generally, if you understand what they're feeling as precisely as possible, you can design something to alleviate their condition. But that's what I'll do. I'll take it right back to the most fundamental questions and go deeper.
I'm really struck in this. I mean, this makes a lot of sense to me. And it's so obvious in a way. The importance of finding out, how does the patient feel? I mean, what's actually their felt, embodied sense of them and this experience?
Well, it's important because, they go to the Western doctor who's as busy as possible trying to fit them into the boxes that you talked about before, but they're Western medicine boxes. And often the patient doesn't feel that at all. The doctor go, "Oh, I think you're depressed." And they go, "I don't really feel depressed." And the doctor goes, "Trust me, you're depressed." Because then they can give them an antidepressant. I mean, how many options does a GP have? They don't have lots of not like us. We can design things for the patient. We are so flexible, and but a GP really, they have to push the patients into these boxes, and this is where the whole medicine evidence just drives me crazy, because you're encouraging this thinking by the box thing, where they go, I know there's the evidence for this particular drug to work, and this patient doesn't quite fit the parameters, but they're close enough, so I'm going to give it to them anyway. I mean, sure, evidence is really important, and I think, but that's really the Western medicine job, and the people who are into research in Chinese medicine, fantastic. But as a clinician, it can cause problems. For example, it already causes problems for Western doctors. They learn in medical school about when you're doing medicine research, you don't want the placebo effect to skew your results, so you try to reduce the placebo as much as you can. But then they get confused. They actually carry that into clinic. In clinic, you want every single possible thing going for you that you can. If you can encourage the placebo effect, by God, you want to do that. You don't want to exclude it. I mean, you're not doing research in clinic. You're trying to get patients to feel better. So, for example, they did some research on different colored pills. Which colored pills have the best placebo effect? Blue, green, black, white, red? Turns out red.
Yeah, well, Matrix, baby.
Exactly. So sometimes what I'll do is, just make sure I've got some red dates in the script, make sure I've got some goji berries in the script, something like that. Not only does it make the herbal formula look nice, but who knows? It might have that little bit of extra, oh, I feel good factor.
Yeah, and it's pretty.
And it's pretty.
So I have patients get off my table sometimes, and they're quite astonished because they feel really different. This is one of the things that I so love about acupuncture. It can so dramatically and so quickly change a person's perception of themselves. And they get off the table and they say something to the effect of, well, it's like I don't feel pain, or I feel great, or I haven't felt like this in I don't know how long. What if it's just in my head? This is such an interesting thing to me. I hear it on a regular basis, and it's what if it's in my head? And what goes through my head is what goes through my head? What goes through my head is if it's just in your head, it's somehow not valid. And then it brings up this question, which is if the mind can make the body ill, we call it hypochondria. If the mind can make the body well, we call it placebo. Okay, there's those two issues, but here's the big question for me. What's up with this mind thing? Because it seems to play a really powerful part. And of course, here in the West, we see it as somehow being separate from our physicality. Those of us that practice Chinese medicine have the good fortune to recognize it's actually interwoven with our physicality, like the warp and woof of a piece of fabric. So we don't really make that distinction so much, but our patients get very, very hung up on that. I'm wondering how you deal with that.
Well, I don't get that a lot here. It might be a different population. I really see it as Western medicine conditioning. And this mind body differentiation is slowly wearing down so that people are recognizing that, how their body feels is going to influence the mind and vice versa. So I think that's gradually wearing down. Maybe in the Midwest, it's a little bit slower. But when patients say, I feel really good, my next statement is usually, well, you know what? That's normal. That's how you should be feeling. Oh.
Okay, I'll pull that one out next time it rolls by.
And often, it's also important when they do feel good, and especially if they come, if they feel good, I say, well, that's great, because now that you go well with herbs, you go well with acupuncture, you now have an alternative to white coats and stethoscopes. Just remember, it's not that we can do everything. Chinese medicine isn't fantastic at everything. Western medicine is fantastic at lots of stuff, but they're not fantastic at everything either. And here is an option for you to use if you're not feeling good, and especially when the Western doctor is going, not really sure what it is. Maybe we can try this new drug that's just come out. Maybe you can say, okay, I'll give that a bit of thought. I'm just going to pop over here first.
Right.
So constantly, I feel it's really important to reinforce that they do feel good and that they should keep that in mind after they've gone away. They can come back then, or at least they can give it a try, or at least give me a ring and ask me, do you think you could help with this? And I might say, no, I can't. But I might say, and probably will say, oh, I can give it a try, or yes, I've seen that a lot. That should go really well, But encouraging your patients to recognize that they do feel good with your treatment and remember that.
Remember that they felt good. Yeah, so often, well, especially here in the States where they sell drugs on television, right? They have advertising for pharmaceuticals. People are being bombarded right and left with advertisements about how you're feeling bad.
Yeah, well, we don't have that here in Australia, and we have a really fantastic healthcare system, and the doctors here are not as rabidly anti-complementary, or at least most of them aren't, as they might be in other parts. But I think there's a big problem when you mix money and medicine. They should not be inextricably linked. It's the same thing. I mean, these are getting more into more broad issues, but it's the same thing when you get medicine by litigation.
Mm,
We have a lot of that now in Western medicine, thankfully not much in Chinese medicine, but how many times are people sent for scans or tests or things that they normally by the clinical judgment of the doctor wouldn't need, but the doctor is doing it simply because if they happen to miss that 1 in 10,000 or 1 in a million chance, they'll be sued.
right. Yeah. Defensive
This is
medicine.
medicine by litigation.
Yeah. Let's move a little bit to a slightly different subject, one that's near and dear to my heart, which is fluid physiology and pathology.
A 20-year-old book.
It's a 20-year-old book. Yeah. Well, and it's about to be re-released in a new form.
It is. Dan Bensky has agreed to do that through Eastland Press, and he and I have spent many months going over it and correcting things and improving the final quality. Which from the Eastland Press, I'll be very happy to see this new edition because their book designer he's an award-winning book designer, and it'll be much more clear and well set out. It's going to be a pleasure, I think, to see it. But according to Dan, I think we'll probably see that in the sometime in the first half of 2019.
I look forward to it. I've got the first edition, and I think at this moment in time, at least as we're recording this, those are available on Amazon for like $400.
Yeah, you'd always have people who try things like that. But the second edition had lots of different aspects of acupuncture and fluid physiology, including.
So more acupuncture in the second edition.
Oh, yes. That's the second edition from like 10 or 12 years ago.
And how will the third edition be different than the first two?
Basically with the corrections that we've done in a new format. So there's not a lot of new content. We did start to put in new content, and then I realized, wait a minute, the stuff I'm putting in would actually be better in a new book. So I'm working on a series of books on gynecology. And some of that content I was going to put in the fluid physiology book. We're making a whole gynecology book, which I think will be better because the acupuncture content that was in the fluid physiology book basically got no notice, even though Wang Jui is now a household name in Chinese medicine circles. But I think the first article ever to appear in English was translated in the fluid physiology book. Never hear about that, right? There's some other interesting. Well, of course, I wrote it.
So did you study with Dr. Wang Jui?
I did not, but I happened to come across an article in a Chinese medicine journal called "The Phenomena of Acupuncture Channel Deficiency." I thought that's interesting, and it was interesting enough with lots of new content. I mean, Wang Jui is he's so creative and this article was really interesting, and it's there in that second edition of the Fluid Physiology, and of course it'll be there in the Eastland Press book too.
Great. What is it all those years ago that got you so interested in working with fluids, phlegm, rheum, all things kind of squishy and soggy?
It was actually Jerry Cantor from New York who was really interested in phlegm, and he keep asking questions about phlegm and stuff, and especially when we're walking around the streets of Nanjing in 1981, and he'd been pulled over by one of the spit monitors because it's against the law to spit on the street, and he'd happened to spit on the street, and the spit monitor.
Wait, they had spit monitors?
They had spit monitors, right? And the spit monitor collared him and started saying, you can't spit on the street. And Jerry's going, wow, this is great. You're not showing me any favoritism at all. And the spit monitor is thinking that he's arguing with him. So he starts to yell. And then Jerry's going, yeah, no, that's fantastic. You shouldn't, just because I spit, you shouldn't show it. Just because I'm a foreigner, you shouldn't show me any favoritism. Meanwhile, he's got a crowd around. And, you've seen, I'm sure you've seen the spit grills on the streets in China. They used to be absolutely horrendous. But he was very interested in phlegm and sputum and all things like that. So I started doing some translation about it, and I thought, yeah, I can make this into a book. And another reason was that when you're writing a book, you spend 3, 4, 5 years, and what you don't want to see just before your book comes out is somebody else covering exactly the same topic.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man.
Well, I think I can say nobody has covered that topic before or since. And in fact, people really don't know where to put it. Although I went to a scholarly conference in Canberra in November last year. And they're historians of medicine, some of them very well known. And the convener wanted me to do a little bit of a talk on Chinese medicine from a practitioner's point of view, because they're doing it all from the academic point of view. And they didn't know me from Adam, but then I gave the talk, and then one of them said, hey, wait a minute. Are you the guy that did that fluid book? I said, yeah. And they said, wow, oh yeah, we know you. That's the only source for so many of these concepts. So even the academics haven't dug as deep into some of those aspects as that fluid book covers.
Imagine this. A patient walks into your clinic. They're carrying more than the pain in their body. There's a story there. A history woven with the stress of long days, the ache of things unsaid, and the quiet longing for something to shift. You listen, not just with your ears, but with your hands, your intuition, your heart. It's not just about needles or a formula. It's about connection, understanding the threads that tie us together, mind, body, and spirit. That is where golden flower Chinese herbs comes in. Rooted in tradition and crafted with care, their formulas are more than herbs. They're a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern practice. Every bottle, a quiet partner in your work, helping you to meet your patients where they are. Because healing isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about creating trust, cultivating belonging, and helping someone feel truly seen. Golden Flower Chinese Herbs, your partner in practice and connection, where tradition meets care. Well, I got that fluid book years ago. I still read it in fact, I was reading it just the other day because I got a really tough case of edema. And I keep thinking, this is a book that they could probably translate back into Chinese, and it would help a lot of people.
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I mean, of course, most of the sources for the book were in Chinese. It's just that they're spread out here and there. All I did was gather them together.
Well, exactly. It's all in one place. It's the compendium of phlegm. It's
Well, when you got your first edition, did you get the samples?
Samples of what?
The phlegm samples that we sent out with them. You didn't get that?
I don't think I got the phlegm. No,
That's
I
okay.
don't.
I'll send them to you, Michael. It's fine. They're a bit dried out by now, but I'll send them to you.
But I lived in Beijing for a few years, so I know a lot about
you should have
street-side phlegm.
You've got samples of your own. That's fine then.
Hey, I want to ask you a question about fluids, and I'm actually asking this for a listener. I've been waiting for an opportunity to do this, so I'm kind of excited. This is a first.
Okay.
So I had someone recently because I ask people, I say, hey, is there anyone you'd like to hear on the podcast? And I had a guy recently say, I'd like to hear Steve Clavey. And I wrote him back and I said, you're in luck because I'm going to be talking to him in a couple of weeks. And he writes me back and says, good, would you ask him about how to treat a condition where you're seeing some phlegm or you're seeing some dampness, but the person is mostly yin deficient? Right. So we got damp heat. We know that you got to break those two apart. But what about treating dampness when there's also yin deficiency?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And in fact, I asked a Chinese doctor exactly the same thing at one point, because it is important. And it's important to know that yin deficiency itself can lead to phlegm or damp. In fact, it's really crucial. I'll give you a really concrete example of it in the gynecological sphere, which should tie everything all together. So, you get polycystic ovaries, and they're meant to be a little bit overweight, and they're meant to, have the hair growth and all of this thing. Well, polycystic ovaries usually are created because when I talk to patients, I say there's this residue in the body that has coated the ovarian capsule. And the little follicles that grow each month, from which one of them will ovulate and then the rest should disappear, those follicles also have a coating of phlegm. And they don't disappear. They get stuck, and they can pull fluid into themselves and become cysts, which will last a few months. And they might go away, but by then they've built up another few cysts. Most of the time, these women are, like I said, overweight and, greasy skin, tongue coat that might be a little bit thicker, and they have phlegm and so on, but not always. And some of these women are actually quite thin and emaciated. And if you're working on the polycystic ovaries are phlegm assumption, that gets really hard to figure out. But if you look in the fluid book, there's students often ask me a similar question. How does that work? This, in fact, is deficient phlegm. And it's phlegm that's the result of deficiency. Now, in the book, there's a essay by Zhang Jingyue. Zhang Jingyue did the Jingyue Quanshu and also the Lei Jing, very well-known Ming Dynasty practitioner who had an encyclopedic knowledge of the Huangji Neijing, and that's where the Lei Jing comes in. Lei means category, so he took the Huangji Neijing and made it into categories. Anyway, his essay says this phlegm is created from kidney deficiency, and it could be kidney yang deficiency, in which case the yang qi is not sufficient to metabolize the fluids. You don't get the qi hua, the qi transformation aspect, because the yang isn't supporting it. Conversely, you can also have kidney yin, which is deficient, which means the fluids are deficient, and you can get, so because they're deficient, they thicken. And then especially if you get, say, yin deficiency that is leading to heat, then that's yet another factor that can thicken the fluids. All of these things can lead to phlegm in the body. Now, the treatment for this is different. For kidney yang deficiency, of course, you tonify kidney yang. That'll help transform the fluids. This is wen hua, right? Warm transformation. But for kidney yin deficiency, you don't treat the phlegm directly. You absolutely don't treat the phlegm directly. And Zhang Jingyue is scathing about the people who try to do that using things like guntan wan or erchen wan, or all the drying, warming, parching things that will just make the patient worse. He said the treatment for that can only be to nourish the body fluids. Otherwise, you try to eliminate phlegm. How are you going to do that? The only way you can do it is eliminate every single bit of body fluid. Well, that's not going to be too good for you, is it? So in those cases where it's a yin deficiency with phlegm, tonifying the yin is going to be the best way to go about it. And then you can add maybe just a little bit of some of those herbs that also break up phlegm. But if you look at the back of the fluid book, there's a list of herbs that deal with phlegm, and not all of them are what you would think. So something like xuanshen, for example, is also a phlegm reducer. Something like tu sizi also deals with damp. So, or qianshi, which is another really underused underused herb because it consolidates the kidneys, gu shen, but it also clears damp. As a matter of fact, way back, one of the people that you know, Su Dongpo, Dongpo Ro,
Mm.
that beautiful dish, Dongpo Ro with the fatty pork.
Oh yeah.
If you're not
Melt in your
vegetarian,
mouth.
it's a beautiful dish. He was one of the people who dug the West Lake in Hangzhou. He was an administrator there in the Song Dynasty. But every day he would have qianshi, which is the fox nuts, the Urale, I think, Euryale. He would have that for breakfast because it tonified kidneys, but also removed damp. Anyway, tonifying is the way to get rid of the yin deficiency. And even something like Zhibai Di Huangwan, to be totally concrete in the treatment method, if you look at Zhibai Di Huangwan, it has both tonifying and draining components, just like Liu Wei Di Huangwan, but a little bit more for cooling.
Mm-hmm.
All you need to do
Except you're getting rid of more heat.
yeah, that's right. You just emphasize those aspects of that formula that you need.
So this reminds me a little bit of treating dry coughs, where you've got this phlegm that's kind of desiccated in the bronchioles or in the lungs, and you need to moisten to get that stuff to move.
That's really good. Yeah, that's a really good analogy there, Michael. It's floating the boat. You bring up the fluids to enable the pathogenic phlegm to be eliminated. So
Right. Because then you can kind of wash things away. If they're fluid, then you can wash them away.
yes, yep. So I hope that answers that question. But it is really, it's a common question. I had it myself, and but this is where the flexibility in raw herbs, the way that you can very subtly design your script for the patient, it comes in really handy.
Yeah. Well, and this too, for me, is the beauty of this medicine that we practice, that we're able to look at every unique situation and go, what do they need? What is actually going on here? And what would help it? It's never a dull moment, is it?
No, it isn't, and it's that's why after 30 years of practicing, it just it never ceases to be fun. Of course, it's really I think it's important to keep learning things and reading things and trying out new angles because really it's after a long time it's easy to sit in clinic and go, okay, I know what'll fix this, that'll fine. But if you just keep doing the same old thing all the time, where's the fun in that?
Right. Anything in particular right now that's new, that's got your attention, that's got you sort of gnawing on a new edge?
Oh, there's always new fun things. I went to a seminar recently with a professor from Beijing called Chen Ming, and he had some really good angles on Shanghan Lun formula. So I've been trying out some of those. I mean, that's such a deep subject and an amazing resource for us to use, and so simple in so many cases. So yeah, that's I'm really having a lot of fun. You should get him on, Chen Ming. He doesn't speak English. You'd have to translate for him.
Well, I can kind of get around in Chinese, but I think I'll get someone else to do the translation, because
Uh-huh.
hosting a show and trying to translate the guests at the same time,
True.
that's a lot of bandwidth.
Hmm.
But I'll see. That might be fun. We did that show with Huang
Yeah, that was great. I
a
love
little
that
while
show.
ago.
Yeah.
And that was really fun, because as I was editing it, I realized, oh my God, we can do a Chinese show as well. So it was the first bilingual podcast for Geological.
There's some great talent. Well, and the talent is both in China and the West. I think people often talk about, oh, the communists, they really destroyed Chinese medicine, and I think I don't necessarily agree with that. All of Chinese medicine is still there. It's in the books, and lots of people like Huang and Chen Ming and Wang Jui and so on. They don't just let it rest with what they learned. I think what the communists did, if we have to put it like that, is they made it available for widespread education. Instead of just having to do an apprentice style thing, you could teach classes and have people know all the basics. But even after 5 years, even after 5 years in a Chinese medical school, there's still so much to do. What I think has been not so great in China is this push to integrate Chinese and Western medicine, and the push to make Chinese medicine more like Western medicine. I think that's a disaster. And for example, Chunming, when we went to dinner, and I was saying, he was asking about the clinic and dispenser. I say, yeah, we do all of our own powder, and we weigh out herbs in the old way. And he said, really? He said, oh gosh, the foreigners are doing it. Foreigners are doing keeping Chinese medicine the way it was in the old days. He was saying that approvingly, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of, like in Taiwan, you're doing a lot of granules. China, the granule factories are really pushing it hard to do granules. And not, like I said, I don't have anything against granules, but I think you do lose a little bit of the subtlety sometimes.
Well, we certainly lose some of the flexibility. You can add some things, but you can't take things away.
Yeah, if you're doing formulas, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure, as it always is. I look forward to a time when we can actually sit down in the same time zone and maybe have a cup of Taiwanese tea together. That would be nice.
I'm expecting a shipment of tea from Taiwan.
Are you now?
Friend of mine, yeah, friend of mine years ago wandered around Taiwan and happened to find this wholesaler that was a representative for a grower up in the mountains, and introduced me to their Chun, the Four Seasons.
Oh man, I love Sun.
Yeah, which is a variation of Tie Guanyin, the Iron Buddha, and it is fabulous. Yeah, well, this friend was. Hey, wait a minute, that was you. You're the one who introduced me to these people. Well, I've been importing from them now for like 15 years. So thank you, Michael.
One of the fun things about hanging out in a place like Taiwan, well, China too, for that matter, you go there to study, at least I went there to study medicine, but all the other stuff that happened around that was actually the sweet stuff. I mean, I got to learn some medicine too. That was wonderful. But all the other stuff around it has actually been invaluable in really in practicing.
Yes. Some of those unconscious cultural things, there's no separation between mind and body, that say naps are a really good thing, for example, that it isn't a sin to enjoy food,
Mm-hmm.
and that the food that you eat can actually really be healthy and still bloody delicious. All that stuff, it just shows some of the weird ways that we come at life in the West. Not to say they don't have some weird things too.
No, they got their own plenty of weird things, but even simple things like cold, right? I mean, we know that the Chinese have this thing about fearing cold, and here in the West, trying to get people to stop drinking ice water when they got digestive issues is, it's
Yeah.
it's so hard. But I remember working in a clinic in Beijing, totally illegal thing, but we owe guanxi, so make guanxi, and I was seeing Chinese people, the ones that would be willing to see me. And I had this woman come in one day, young woman in her like mid 20s ish. And she says, I just got my period 2 days ago. Last night I went out with my girlfriends, and unthinkingly I drank an iced soda, and my period stopped. I've got a headache. I'm nauseous and bloated. And I thought, man, Chinese medicine is so easy when you do it in Chinese.
Yes, because they notice the connections.
She told me exactly what I needed to do.
Yep.
Right? I mean, could you imagine someone coming in the West and saying, well, it's like, it's weird. My period suddenly stopped yet. Well, first of all, they probably wouldn't come to us. They go to, I don't know what they do. But over there, yeah, there's like, oh yeah, I drank some cold and I need to go see a Zhongyi now to fix that shit.
Yeah, it is, but you can sort of track it down, but the thinking does make it a little bit difficult for us. On the other hand, when you read the old case histories, a lot of those doctors have to contend with people who know a little bit about something. So when, for example, in a script, you hardly ever see the words Da Huang. It'll always be something like Jiu Da Jun or something else, or Da Jun or Sheng Da Jun, because every Chinese person knows what Da Huang does. And they're going to go, hey, you put Da Huang in my script. Am I going to get the runs? Or they'll go, oh, you gave me warm herbs, but I'm pretty sure what I've got is cold. So,
Right.
it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
It goes the other way.
We don't have to contend with that sort of stuff.
The joys of medicine practice, huh?
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, Steve, again, thank you so much. And really looking forward to reading your new book.
Fantastic. Nice talking to you.
Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.